Great Reset. What is it? And what impact could it have on all of us? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Before we hit the Great Reset button, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. If you click the like button, it convinces YouTube to show this video to more people. So, if you've been paying attention to those really rich people at the World Economic Forum talking about how great they are, or if you've been going down the 4chan rabbit hole, you may have heard of this concept, the Great Reset. It works like this. The world economy has been broken because of the coronavirus, and to fix it, we have to turn the economy off and then back on again. Okay, it's not actually like pressing a big reset button, like some stock images would have you believe. It's more like this.
And moving forward, you should expect the government to take a more active role in the economy and in societal issues.
The idea of a Great Reset has been around for years, but it really started to gain traction back in June 2020, when the World Economic Forum officially announced their Great Reset initiative. They write, there is an urgent need for global stakeholders to cooperate in simultaneously managing the direct consequences of the COVID-19 crisis. Even if you haven't heard of the World Economic Forum, you've probably heard of Davos, which is their annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland. It's where more than 3,000 business leaders, politicians, prominent activists, and others meet to talk about how they're making the world a better place, in their opinion. It's basically Burning Man for the global elite. Davos partners include some of the biggest companies in the world, like Alibaba, Google, Goldman Sachs, Huawei, BlackRock, JP Morgan Chase, McKinsey, Citi, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Facebook. You get the picture. The last Davos summit happened in January this year, just as the coronavirus was spreading around the world. And there's no doubt that the coronavirus has caused a crisis. More than one, actually. Thanks to the Chinese government's initial 6-week cover-up, the coronavirus spread around the world, infecting people in every country. More than 1 million people have died worldwide. The other crisis is the economic devastation. As governments around the world followed the Chinese Communist Party's lockdown model, small businesses were forced to close, and job loss has skyrocketed. So with these twin crises caused by the Chinese and other governments' response to the coronavirus, what can be done? Well, the World Economic Forum has a solution. The Great Reset. This is not the first time the World Economic Forum has come up with a grand-sounding global solution, the kind that, depending on your point of view, sounds either inspirational or terrifying. Like when they talked about Globalization 4.0 shaping a new global architecture in the age of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or creating a shared future in a fractured world, or the Great Transformation. With names like these, I'm surprised people weren't scared of the World Economic Forum until now. So back to this year's Great Reset initiative. The World Economic Forum is strangely short on details of how it would actually work. That's probably why it's led to so many conspiracy theories. But while the Great Reset is openly talked about, there's surprisingly little information on specific programs, or how much money ought to be allocated to what. So at this point, it's just vague, big picture stuff. For example, they say governments should implement long overdue reforms that promote more equitable outcomes. Depending on the country, these may include changes to wealth taxes, the withdrawal of fossil fuel subsidies, and new rules governing intellectual property, trade, and competition. Okay, so the solution to the crises caused by government is more government intervention. Intervention that has nothing to do with the coronavirus. It's almost as if governments want to use the coronavirus as an excuse to do the things they had been planning to do anyway. So obviously, The kind of conservative folk who want small government, low taxes, and property rights are not too happy about that agenda. They don't want a small group of elites at the World Economic Forum rewriting the rules of the economy, or giving governments an excuse to become more powerful with more control over the economy. But it's more than that. The World Economic Forum says we must build entirely new foundations for our economic and social systems. They don't explain what that means, which has led some people to compare it to the Communist Manifesto, because it sounds a bit like the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. But while the World Economic Forum's promises of a Great Reset may sound like a communist love fest, the far left is not going to love it either. I'll explain why after the break. Welcome back. The World Economic Forum is proposing a Great Reset, one that promises more equity and inclusion. It may be pandering to the political left, but that doesn't mean the political left is actually going to like it. Keep in mind that the main groups that have been protesting the World Economic Forum for decades have been on the far left, from fiery climate activists, to anti-globalists, to straight-up communists. Folks on the left typically don't like a small group of rich capitalists at the World Economic Forum dictating policy for the rest of us. Rich capitalists like Prince Charles from the British monarchy, Larry Fink from BlackRock Multinational Investment Company, and George Soros from all the conspiracy theories. So really, the Great Reset is something ordinary people on the left and right see as a potential problem. A small group of rich, powerful elite influencing governments to change the rules of the economy. And while the World Economic Forum has been short on details, here's an example of what the world could look like after a Great Reset, from an article published by the World Economic Forum 4 years ago. It imagines life in the year 2030, where everything is digitized and everyone has free, unlimited access to clean energy somehow. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. That sounds like abject poverty, but it's totally not. The article is suggesting that you don't need to own anything because you can just get everything for free as a service. We have access to transportation, accommodation, food, and all the things we need in our daily lives. One by one, all these things became free, so it ended up not making sense for us to own much. If that sounds like a beautiful utopia to you, think about it in a historical context. Remember all the governments that promised free stuff? In China, Mao Zedong promised land to the tillers. But as soon as he rose to power, he ended up killing the landlords and forcing people to work on collective farms. Soon, millions of people starved to death. Well, except for the wealthy elite. In Venezuela, Hugo Chavez promised to eradicate poverty. But within 2 decades, he had turned a nation that was unequal but prosperous into a nation where everyone was equal, equally poor, and can barely afford food. Well, except for the wealthy elite. Governments that promised equality and free stuff have always ended up taking away people's money and property rights, from the Soviet Union to Cuba to Zaire. Wait. But how about the Nordic countries that are touted as great models of socialism? The secret is, they're not socialist. The Nordic countries all made free market reforms in the late 20th century because their economies were crashing under the weight of big government. Now, they all have free markets, private business, and ensure strong property rights. And let's look at Norway, which has the highest GDP per capita. Their secret to economic success? It starts with massive oil extraction, and then they invest oil money in stock markets in other countries. So basically, Norway pays for its big social programs through oil and capitalism, not through green energy and equity. So, back at the World Economic Forum, when they talk about so-called equity, and when they talk about a green recovery, keep in mind, this is being said by a small group of elite billionaires who are flying to their meeting in Davos on thousands of private jets. When they talk about a great reset, do you think they really want equality for everyone? Seriously, who on earth would put their hopes for a greener and more equitable world in the hands of governments and the wealthy elite? Do you think that will benefit everyone? Or do you think it'll benefit the governments and the wealthy elite? Sure, they still haven't given us any details on what the Great Reset actually is. But I know one thing. If it happens, the rest of us are not going to like it. But the real question is, will it actually happen? Are governments and multinational corporations actually pushing for a Great Reset? Or is it just inspirational/terrifying marketing speak for people who go to the World Economic Forum to feel good about themselves? After all, the World Economic Forum has been using similar language to the Great Reset for years. Like here, where they talk about how the underlying systems are broken and a major rethink needs to take place to move in the right direction to realize a global vision for a more sustainable and inclusive growth model for the world and future generations. That's from their Great Transformation theme back in 2012. And it reminds me of the time I forgot to finish an English paper in college and ended up staying up all night to turn my 2-page essay into a 10-page essay, with the help of lots and lots of Red Bull. My point is that the World Economic Forum's rhetoric sounds great, but it says nothing. And that's probably the best case scenario.